Dark Core Prologue. The call of the vein in the vast silence of deep space. There are things that man should never touch, things that should remain buried and forgotten. But curiosity and the endless thirst for power have a way of overcoming the deepest fears. A mining crew on the edge of the galaxy uncovered something impossible, a substance deep within an asteroid. It wasn't gold or anything they could trade for riches. It was black, a black that seemed to swallow the light. At first they didn't understand it, but the moment they exposed it to light, it moved, whispered. The whispers were like voices, long dead, begging for release. They didn't realize it then, but they were not just mining a new element. They were opening a door to something far darker, far older than they could have ever imagined. Chapter 1. The mine's heartbeat. Lena Harris stood alone in the control room, gazing out at the inky darkness of space beyond the station's portholes. The stars seemed so distant, their light faint against the deep void, as though it were swallowed by the asteroid they had called home for the past year. A cold, mechanical hum filled the room, the station's systems operating as usual, but Lena could sense a shift, a vibration in the air that made everything feel off. The sense of unease she'd been battling for weeks was growing, its pressure slowly squeezing her chest tighter. The mining station had been buzzing with activity at first, excitement in the early stages of the dig. But something had changed. The vein, the strange black substance they'd uncovered deep within the asteroid's core, was the catalyst for that change. Lena couldn't explain it. No one could. But it had somehow woven its tendrils into the fabric of their reality, turning the once predictable hum of the station into something alien. At first it had been just whispers, soft, barely audible, like voices drifting through the station walls, whispers that tugged at her mind, wrapping themselves around her thoughts. She had ignored them at first, chalking it up to the isolation, to the constant hum of machinery. But then it became clear that the others weren't just hearing things. Something was wrong. Lena's fingers drifted over the console in front of her, and for the 100th time she felt the pull. It wasn't physical, it was something much deeper. The vein seemed to reach out to her, pulling at the corners of her mind like a gravitational force. There was no other way to explain it, no other way to make sense of the deep, gnawing feeling that something was inside her, pulling at her from the inside out. Behind her she heard footsteps approaching. She turned slightly, a vague sense of relief washing over her at the sound. The one person who had stayed close to her through all of this was Jackson, a familiar presence in an increasingly alien world. He entered the control room with the quiet grace of someone who had been awake too long, his face drawn and weary. Jackson Marshall, ex-soldier, now an engineer working the mine's control systems. His once rugged appearance had begun to soften just a little since they'd arrived at the station. And there was always something about the way he carried himself that made Lena feel like she wasn't entirely alone. "Lena?" Jackson's voice broke the silence, his words sharp as if he had been speaking to her for a while without her noticing. Lena blinked and turned her attention fully to him. Her fingers remained resting on the console, still warm from the touch. "You're staring at that screen again." His voice held a tinge of concern, but there was also something else. A quiet, urgent insistence. Jackson always had a way of making her feel things, even when she didn't want to. A sense of responsibility, maybe, or something more human. Lena didn't respond right away, her mind still wandering back to the whispers that only she could hear. Finally, she tore her eyes away from the screen and focused on Jackson. "I'm fine," she replied, the words leaving her mouth too quickly, almost robotic. She knew he wouldn't buy it, but she had to say it, had to try to convince herself. Jackson raised an eyebrow and took a step closer. "Lena, you're not fine. I've been watching you. Something's going on. You've been distant, more than usual." His words were soft, but his gaze was unwavering. There was no mistaking the concern in his eyes. Lena had never been able to hide anything from him for long, even when she tried. She swallowed hard. It wasn't the first time he had noticed something wrong, but this time, it felt different. The whispers were louder than before. The pull of the vein was stronger. "I'm fine," she repeated, her voice lower this time, almost as though saying it again might somehow make it true. "Really, I've been thinking." "About what?" Lena hesitated. How could she explain the strange sensations that were creeping through her body, through her mind? How could she tell him that it wasn't just the mineral they'd uncovered, but something more, something ancient, something that called to her in a way she couldn't describe? It wasn't rational, wasn't something that could be explained away. She bit her lip and turned her gaze back to the console in front of her, the pulsing lights in the control room reflecting off the glass of the porthole. "About the vein," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson's jaw tightened at the mention of the substance. He'd heard the rumors, the strange tales that had begun circulating the station. Some of the crew had already started to show signs of what they called vein madness. There were reports of people going into the tunnels and never returning. Some had become unrecognizable, changed. "Lena, we've talked about this." Jackson's voice was even now, though there was an edge of something raw beneath it. "That thing isn't just dangerous, it's a curse. The longer we stay here, the worse it's going to get. The longer we study it, the harder it's going to be to pull ourselves out of this, whatever this is." Lena felt the weight of his words sink into her chest. She understood, she truly did. But something about the vein had wrapped itself around her. Around who she was in ways she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just a scientific curiosity. It wasn't just a dangerous substance. It was something personal, something that made her feel as if she belonged. It had chosen her. She knew it. The station around them seemed to hum, vibrating under the weight of the vein, as though the very walls were alive with its power. Lena could feel it now, closer than ever, like a living pulse running through the air. It was familiar, the way it whispered her name. "You're right," she said quietly, still unwilling to meet Jackson's eyes. "But I can't stop thinking about it." He stepped closer to her, his expression softening. "Lena," she didn't want to hear the words of concern, the warnings. She had heard them before. But she knew deep down that he wasn't just worried about the vein. He was worried about her. He was afraid. And she hated that. She hated the fact that she wasn't sure if she should be afraid too. "Jackson," she said, her voice trembling, slightly, though she fought to keep it steady. "I think I'm changing, I feel it." There it was, the truth she had been afraid to say out loud. Jackson's face hardened for a moment. He was silent, studying her with a gaze that seemed to pierce straight through her. Then he exhaled slowly and shook his head. "Lena, no one changes that fast. Not like this. The vein—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. What could he say? Could he save her from this darkness? Lena didn't know, but a part of her, the part that felt the pull, no longer wanted to be saved. It wanted more. The void. The day passed slowly, and the quiet unease settled back into the air of the station, like a weight pressing down on Lena's chest. The whispers were louder now, like a song she could no longer ignore. Her hand hovered over the console, the lights reflecting off her skin. The vein was calling her, and she was starting to wonder if she was meant to answer. Chapter 2. The Pull of Darkness. The hum of the station's system seemed to reverberate through Lena's bones as she sat in the darkened control room. The monitors cast pale, flickering lights across her face, but she didn't really see them anymore. She was staring at the same set of data she'd seen 1,000 times before. The chemical composition of the vein, its strange, unidentifiable structure. There was a lingering unease in her chest, a tightness she couldn't shake off. The data didn't lie. The vein was unique, and that was the problem. Nothing about it made sense. Lena's thoughts were fragmented. The whispers in her mind had grown louder, more insistent. At night, she lay awake in her bunk, hearing them in the shadows. Soft. At first, like a murmur on the edge of her awareness. But now the voices were clearer, closer. They sounded like people, People she knew, people who had been long lost to the void of deep space, their voices carried on the unseen currents of the universe. But it wasn't just the voices. No, it was the feeling that came with them, the intense pull, a longing that had begun to feel like a need. Her breath quickened as the station's lights flickered once again. The pressure was building, not just from the strange energy in the station but also from within herself. The vein was alive, and it was calling to her. There was a light knock on the doorframe, and Lena turned to find Jackson standing there. His usual expression of concern was back, his eyes darkened with worry. "Lena, we need to talk," Jackson said, his voice low but urgent. Lena nodded slowly, her gaze shifting from the console to his. She hadn't realized how much time had passed. She felt a strange sense of being adrift, disconnected from the world around her, as if her body were no longer fully hers. Jackson was the only tether she had left, the only person who seemed to still see the woman she used to be. But it wasn't enough. He stepped into the room, the door sliding shut behind him with a soft hiss. "This isn't just the vein. It's something worse," he continued, his voice tight with frustration. "I can see it in you, Lena. You're different, and you're pulling away from me, from all of us." She heard the words, but they didn't seem to make sense. She wasn't. Pulling away, not really. She felt like she was being drawn to the very heart of the asteroid, where the vein pulsed beneath the surface, waiting for something. "I'm not pulling away," Lena finally said, her voice far too calm for the turmoil she felt inside. She rose from the chair, her legs unsteady, the weight of her own body unfamiliar. I'm just trying to understand what's happening." Jackson's eyes softened, though there was still a faint trace of disbelief. "Understand?" he repeated. "Lena, this thing, it's not just a mineral. It's alive. It's influencing everyone. Don't you see it? It's changing you." The words rang in her ears, but in her heart something else echoed louder. The vein was alive, yes, but it wasn't just some alien substance. It was calling to her, choosing her, and she could feel it deep within her bones. She was no longer sure where the vein ended and where she began. She turned away from Jackson, her hand unconsciously reaching toward the console again, feeling the steady, almost rhythmic pulse of the data. The sensation was familiar now, as though it had been inside her all along, waiting for her to recognize it. "I know what it wants from me," Lena whispered, so quietly that Jackson almost didn't hear her. But when he took a step closer, he caught the words, and they struck him like a blow. His face tightened in concern. "Lena, what are you talking about?" "I feel it," she said, her voice shaking, but only just. "The vein, I can feel it calling me." Her fingers hovered above the screen, feeling the power that surged through the station systems. It wasn't just electrical currents. It was something else, something that made her skin tingle. The vein was inside her now. It had already begun to change her, and she couldn't fight it any longer. She didn't want to. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. He stepped closer, reaching for her arm, his hand hovering for a moment before touching her skin, as if afraid the contact might burn him. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Lena, you don't know what you're saying. The vein is dangerous. It's taking everyone down with it." Lena stared at him, her eyes wide but distant, almost unseeing. "It's not dangerous," she replied softly. "It's not like that." Jackson opened his mouth to argue, but the words got caught in his throat. There was something in her expression, something that terrified him. She was slipping away, little by little, and he didn't know how to stop it. How could he save her from herself? The control room was stifling now, the air thick with tension. Jackson felt the weight of the room pressing down on him, suffocating him. He tried to reach for her again, but Lena stepped back, just out of his reach, her eyes still fixated on the screen, where the vein's influence pulsed in time with her heartbeat. "It's calling to me," Lena murmured again, almost to herself. It's part of me." Her words seemed to hang in the air, filling the room with an eerie sense of inevitability. The space between them seemed to stretch out, becoming vast and unknowable. The darkness had already begun to consume her. Jackson didn't know what to do. He'd heard the others talk about the vein madness, how it affected people, how it twisted their minds and their bodies. But Lena had always been different. She had always been the steady one, the one who could keep it together when everything else seemed to fall apart. But now she was slipping away, and he couldn't save her. For a moment, he simply stood, there watching her, unsure of his next move. The sound of the station's hum seemed to drown out everything else. Then Lena spoke again, her voice trembling. "I need to go down to the mine." Jackson's heart froze. "No, Lena, you can't." He took a step forward, but she held up a hand, her eyes glazed with a strange determination. "I have to," she said more firmly this time. "I have to see it. I have to feel it." Jackson's mind raced. The mine. The heart of the vein. It was there, deep within the asteroid's core, that the whispers had begun. There was a reason no one had gone back down since the first strange incidents had begun. The crew members who had ventured down had come back, changed, some broken beyond recognition. No one went near the vein anymore. But Lena was different. "You don't have to do this," Jackson said quietly, stepping closer, his voice softening. He was desperate now, trying anything to pull her back. "Please, Lena." She didn't look at him. Instead, she turned toward the door, the pull in her chest, growing stronger with each passing moment. "I'm going," she said, her tone final, as though nothing could stop her. She didn't look at him again. "Stay if you want, but I need to see it." With that, she stepped out into the darkened hallway of the station, leaving Jackson standing there, feeling helpless. The door slid shut behind her, and in that moment, Jackson knew that he had already lost her. The vein had claimed her. Chapter 3. Into the Heart of the Vein. The halls of the station were dim and eerily silent as Lena walked toward the lift that would take her deep into the asteroid's bowels. The walls, once gleaming with metal and lights, now seemed to absorb, the light growing darker with every step she took. The usual noise of the station, the hum of machinery, the distant conversations of the crew, had all but faded away. Now only her footsteps echoed through the narrow corridors, each sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. Lena's mind was a whirlpool of confusion, but beneath the uncertainty, something far more primal thrummed. A longing, a call from deep within. The vein. As she reached the lift, she paused for a moment, her fingers hovering over the control panel. The air was heavy around her, thick with a sensation she couldn't quite name. The moment her hand brushed against the panel, the lift doors slid open with a smooth mechanical hiss. She stepped inside, the cool metallic interior of the lift a stark contrast to the heat building in her chest. She could feel the pulse of the vein even now, reverberating through her, making her blood feel hotter, her skin more sensitive. "Lena." The voice broke her out of her trance, pulling her back to the present. It was Jackson's voice, the very last thing she had wanted to hear right now. He was standing outside the lift, his eyes wide with panic, his body stiff with tension. "Where are you going?" Her pulse quickened at the sound of his voice, and for a brief moment she felt something familiar stir inside her. A flicker of the woman she used to be. The woman who would never have considered going down into the mines alone. The woman who wouldn't have been so easily swept up by the allure of something as dangerous as the vein. "Jackson," she said quietly, her voice distant, though she tried to make it sound steady. "I have to do this." The words tasted strange on her tongue, but they were true. She had to go. The vein was calling to her, and nothing was going to stop her from answering it. Jackson stepped forward, his face pale, his expression torn. "No, you don't. Lena, please, whatever it is, we can figure it out, together." His voice cracked with desperation. He reached for her, but Lena stepped back, instinctively pulling away from him. "I've already made up my mind." Her voice was soft, almost sorrowful. She didn't want to hurt him, but the pull she felt toward The vein was too strong, and it had been growing stronger every day. She needed to understand it. She needed to know what it wanted from her. Jackson's eyes darkened, and there was a flicker of fear in them. You don't know what it will do. Do you, Lena? It changes people. Look at what it's done to the others. You saw what happened to Gary, to Elise. You saw the way they— Stop! The word was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Lena's voice had hardened, the soft, uncertain woman he had known slipping away, replaced by someone else. Someone who wasn't afraid. I'm not like them, she said, her voice low but certain. And you don't understand. You don't understand what this means to me. Jackson flinched, his chest tightening as if he had been punched. He opened his mouth to say something more, but the words caught in his throat. There was nothing he could say to stop her. He knew that. He knew that the more he tried, the farther she would pull away. She was beyond his reach now, and it terrified him. Lena, please. Don't do this, he whispered. His voice was strained, the weight of his words, hanging between them, thick and heavy with unspoken emotion. But Lena didn't respond. Instead, she turned away, stepping into the lift. The doors slid shut behind her, cutting off Jackson's desperate plea. The moment the doors closed, the space inside the lift felt colder, darker, like a tomb that had swallowed her whole. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and leaned against the wall, her heart pounding in her chest. The vein. It had already taken root inside of her. She could feel it, a burning, insatiable pull in the pit of her stomach. The mind was the heart of it, the core where everything began. It was where the whispers had started, where the strange, unexplainable force had first revealed itself. And now, it was calling to her like a lover, a desperate, inexorable force that would not let her go until she came. As the lift descended deeper into the asteroid, Lena felt a strange calm settle over her. The steady thrum of the lift's engine was like a lullaby, soothing the edges of her anxiety. It was as though she had finally found her place. She had been searching for something all her life, something to fill the hollow space in her chest. And now she had found it. The vein wasn't just some strange substance, it was an answer to a question she hadn't even realized she was asking. The lift slowed, and with a soft jerk it stopped. The doors opened with a hiss, revealing the dark expanse of the mine's lower levels. The air was thick with dust and the smell of metal. The walls of the tunnel were rough, jagged and uneven, almost as if they had been carved by something alive. Lena stepped out, her boots crunching against the gravel floor. She felt a shiver run down her spine, but it wasn't fear. It was excitement. The mine felt like home. The deeper she went, the more it felt like she was stepping into herself. Ahead, the tunnel stretched into darkness, lit only by the faint glow of dim light strung haphazardly along the walls. But even in that dimness, Lena could feel the presence of the vein lurking just beneath the surface. It was there, waiting for her, calling her forward. She didn't have to search for it. She didn't need to know where it was. She could feel, like a magnet pulling her toward it. With every step, the air grew heavier, thicker. She could feel her pulse quickening, her breath coming faster. The whispers had started again, soft at first, like a breeze brushing against her skin. But now they were louder, clearer. She could hear them calling her name, faintly at first, but then more insistent. Lena. She stopped in her tracks, her heart hammering in her chest. The whisper seemed to come from all around her, wrapping itself around her mind like a soft, silken thread. Come closer. Let us in. Lena's hands clenched into fists by her sides as her breath hitched. I'm here, she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. And then, she saw it. It was the vein, or at least part of it. It glistened in the low light, a pulsating mass of black, oily substance that seemed to ripple and move of its own accord. It was more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. The surface was smooth, dark as the deepest night, and it seemed to pulse with life. As Lena stepped closer, she could see the faint traces of iridescent veins running through it, like veins of light coursing beneath the surface of dark water. Her hand reached out on its own, trembling slightly as it hovered just above the substance. She could feel it now, the connection, electric, magnetic, undeniable. The vein was pulling her in, calling her. She could hear its whispers more clearly now. "Closer, Lena. We need you." Her breath quickened as her fingers brushed against the surface of the vein. It was warm, alive. Her skin burned as she made contact with it, the heat surging through her body like an electric shock. She gasped, her knees going weak as a wave of pleasure and pain washed over her. It was overwhelming, and yet she wanted more. "Let it in," the voice whispered again, this time so close that it felt as though it was inside her head, wrapped around. Her thoughts. "Let us in, and we will make you whole." Lena's fingers pressed harder against the vein, and as she did, the world seemed to shift. The mine around her seemed to warp, the walls bending and twisting in a way that defied all logic. This was it. She was here, and nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 4. Unraveling the thread, Lena's hand trembled as it lingered over the surface of the vein. Every part of her screamed to pull away, to regain control. But the sensation, the overwhelming, pulsating warmth under her fingers, kept her rooted in place. Her body hummed with energy, and her skin felt alive in a way it never had before, as if every nerve ending had been awakened. The whispering voices intensified, wrapping themselves around her thoughts like tendrils. They weren't just words anymore, they were feelings. Longing, yearning, desire. "Lena." The voice was soft, but unmistakably intimate, like it was speaking directly into the deepest recesses of her mind. She gasped and jerked her hand back, her heart pounding in her chest. But the pull was already there, unavoidable, inescapable. Her body quivered with anticipation. Every breath she took felt heavier, as though the very air was thickening around her, pressing down on her chest. "What is this?" she whispered, though. The words felt foreign, as if they weren't hers at all. The darkness around her seemed to throb in time with the pulse of the vein. She looked around the mine, the walls slick with the dark, oily substance that seemed to leak from every crack. The deeper she went, the more she saw it. The vein was everywhere. It was not just confined to the strange material she had discovered. It had infected the very rock of the asteroid itself, spreading through the tunnels like a living organism. Her breath came faster now, shallow and erratic, as the weight of what she had discovered began to sink in. The vein wasn't just something that existed in the asteroid. It was a force, a presence. And it wasn't passive. It was alive, and it wanted something from her. She didn't know what, but she knew deep down that she had to find out. The voices continued to whisper, their cadence soothing, almost caressing. "Come closer. We are waiting for you." Her legs moved of their own accord, taking her deeper into the mine. She barely registered the disorienting weight in her limbs as she walked toward the heart of the vein, unable to stop herself. It felt as if something inside of her had shifted, like an internal lock had been unlocked, and now she was being led somewhere. Somewhere she needed to go, somewhere she belonged. The tunnel twisted and turned, narrowing with each step she took. The walls seemed to close in, the dim lights flickering erratically above her, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was thick with the smell of rust and something far less definable, something sweet, yet pungent, that made her head spin. She didn't even flinch when her hand brushed against the sticky black tendrils creeping along the walls. She was no longer afraid. With every step, she felt more like she was becoming the vein, merging with it. The air around her thrummed with energy, and as her footfalls echoed through the mine, she could almost hear the heartbeat of the asteroid beneath her. Her breath caught as the tunnel opened up into a massive chamber, the walls so tall they disappeared into the shadows above. The vein was everywhere, spilling like a liquid across the floor, pooling in strange, organic shapes, rippling with a rhythm that matched the thudding of her own heart. It was here, in this dark, vast space, that she could feel it the most. It was waiting. Lena moved further into the center of the room, her eyes widening as the vein's pulsating form became clearer, more defined. It stretched out before her, vast and mesmerizing like an enormous breathing organism. The whispers now filled her mind entirely, drowning out all other sound, becoming part of her. "You're here. At last." The words didn't come from anyone. Source. They were all around her, reverberating off the walls inside her mind. She gasped, her hand coming up to her mouth in surprise. "You feel it too, don't you? The connection." Her chest tightened, her body trembling with the intensity of the sensation. I feel it," she breathed, though she could barely recognize her own voice. It wasn't just a voice. It was more like an emotion, an overwhelming force that had settled deep within her, taking root. The vein before her shimmered, its surface rippling like water disturbed by an unseen hand. The feeling in her chest grew stronger, deeper, and she couldn't help but step forward, her feet carrying her across the chamber as if drawn by an invisible string. "Closer," it whispered again, the word "a" command that settled in the pit of her stomach, curling like smoke through her veins. She was so close now. The darkness wrapped itself around her like a blanket cocooning her in its warmth. "Touch us," the vein urged, its voice now a mixture of pleasure and power. "Let us show you what you can become." Her hand extended toward the black, slick surface. She was no longer in control of her movements. It was as if her entire being was now connected to the vein, and her body was simply responding to its call. She wasn't Lena anymore. She was something else. Something different. Something new. As her fingers brushed against the surface of the vein, a shock of sensation blasted through her, unlike anything she had ever felt. It was a mix of pain and ecstasy, of power and release. She could feel the energy crackling through, her coursing through her veins like fire. It was too much to bear, and yet she craved more. The vein was inside her now, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. It had entered her mind, her thoughts, and with it came a flood of images, visions of distant places, ancient landscapes, forgotten memories, memories that were not hers. The whispers had become clearer now, each one distinct, as if 1,000 voices had fused into one. "We are one." Her breath hitched in her throat as the words echoed in her mind. Her chest rose and fell with the intensity of the experience. She was overwhelmed. And yet, it felt like home. "You're part of us now, Lena," the vein said, and there was something almost soothing in its tone. Something that made her want to let go, to surrender completely. And just when she thought she couldn't take it any longer, when the overwhelming sensations were about to pull her under, there was a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. Her hand shot, away from the vein as if it had been burned. The connection was broken. Her body trembled violently, the force of the pain tearing through her. She stumbled backward, her knees giving way, and she fell to the cold, jagged ground of the chamber. The vein, it seemed, was pulling away from her now. The warmth and energy that had enveloped her faded, leaving only an aching emptiness. Voices were still there, lingering in the back of her mind. But they were now quiet, distant, like a faint whisper on the wind. Lena lay on the cold ground, her chest heaving with exertion, her body slick with sweat. The mind was silent, save for the pounding of her heart in her ears. But even as she tried to regain her breath, she knew something was changing. The vein had marked her. She didn't know what it wanted from her, what it had taken, but she knew, one thing for certain, the mind, the vein, and everything within it were now part of her, and she could never go back. Chapter 5. The tension between light and shadow Lena's mind was a maelstrom of confusion, the memories of what had just happened swirling around her like a storm she couldn't escape. The vein. The vein had changed her. She felt it in her bones, in the very marrow of her being. It was as though something fundamental had been rewritten inside her, something deep, something primal that she couldn't comprehend fully. She slowly sat up, her fingers pressing against the cold, jagged floor of the chamber. The void around her seemed to hum with energy, the shadows stretching and warping as though they were alive, reaching out for her. She could still feel the remnants of the veins' touch, the burning heat that had shot through her body, leaving a faint, throbbing ache in its wake. Her chest was still tight with the lingering energy, and her breath came in shallow gasps as though she were suffocating. The room was unnervingly quiet now. The whispers had subsided into an almost silence, broken only by the echo of her breathing, the sound of her heartbeat in her ears. Her fingers dug into the ground, grounding her, forcing herself to stay present. But the pull of the vein was still there, like a magnet lodged deep inside her, tugging at her mind. She could still hear it. Faintly. The vein. It was waiting for her to return, waiting for her to accept it. Lena closed her eyes and clenched her jaw, trying to regain some semblance of control. She forced herself to stand, swaying slightly as her legs threatened to give way beneath her. The room seemed to tilt around her, the walls shifting and stretching as though they had taken on a life of their own. She staggered, reaching out to steady herself against the wall, but her fingers brushed against the slick surface of the vein, and it was like the room inhaled with her. Lena, the voice, that familiar, intimate whisper, slithered through her thoughts again. The sound was like silk sliding across her skin, smooth and seductive, luring her deeper. Her heart skipped a beat. The connection was stronger than ever now, like an invisible thread stretching between her and the heart of the vein. She could feel it, the desire, the hunger, the need. The whispers were more urgent now, pleading with her, wanting her to come closer, to embrace them. "Come back, Lena. We are waiting for you. We are part of you." She bit her lip, trying to shut out the voice, trying to resist. But with every passing second, the feeling deepened. The more she resisted, the stronger the call became. She staggered back, nearly tripping over her own feet, and barely caught herself against the wall. Her chest heaved, her heart pounding as the world around her seemed to close in, suffocating her with the pressure of something unseen, something powerful. And then, something shifted. In the distance, she saw a light flicker, a pale ghostly glow. It wasn't bright, but it stood out against the oppressive darkness. Lena's eyes narrowed, instinctively drawn toward it. Without thinking, she pushed herself forward, moving toward the light, toward whatever it was that called to her. Her footsteps were unsteady, but they were purposeful now. Every part of her body, every fiber of her being, was focused on that light. She moved faster, her pulse quickening with each step, the rhythmic hum of the vein echoing in her head like a heartbeat. The further she went, the more the darkness seemed to fade, replaced by the faint glow of the distant light. And then she saw it. It was a room, small and completely untouched by the vein's influence, as though it had been deliberately shielded from its reach. The walls were lined with smooth metal, cold and sterile, and the air here was strangely fresh, almost invigorating compared to the suffocating atmosphere of the deeper mines. It was almost as if this place existed outside of the rules that governed the rest of the asteroid. At the center of the room was an object, a container. It was unlike anything Lena had ever seen, a smooth, crystalline structure, slightly larger than her torso and faintly pulsing with a soft, golden glow. The energy it emanated was different, more controlled, more focused than the chaotic, all-consuming force of the vein. She moved closer, entranced by its light, the warmth of it calling to her, soothing the tension inside her chest. But even as she approached, something told her that this was not something she should touch. This object felt almost like a counterforce, a boundary that the vein could not cross. Lena stood in front of it, her fingers itching to reach out and touch the crystalline surface. She could feel its energy in the air, like static electricity, that made her hair stand on end. It was both calming and electric, a strange fusion of opposites that somehow felt right. But as her fingers reached toward it, something shifted in the air. A low rumble filled the chamber, followed by a sudden screech, a horrible shrill sound that sent her stumbling backward, hands pressed to her ears. The walls began to tremble, as though the entire asteroid was shaking. No, it was a voice, a new voice, one that Lena had never heard before. Don't touch it. Lena froze, the blood draining from her face. The voice was human, but distorted, guttural, familiar, yet foreign. The sound seemed to come from all around her, from the walls, from the very air she was breathing. She turned, her heart pounding wildly, and saw nothing. Just the walls, the shadows, and the faint pulse of the vein that still hung in the distance. She stepped back from the object, unsure of what to do next. The rumbling continued, intensifying, making the walls feel like they were closing in on her. She reached out and gripped the edge of the smooth, metallic surface beside her, grounding herself as the tremors grew stronger. And then, as if in answer to the growing tension, the crystalline object pulsed. Once, twice, each time the glow became brighter, more urgent. The tremors slowed. The walls, the ceiling, everything settled back into a calm stillness. But now, there was a presence. Lena's eyes widened as she slowly, hesitantly, turned to face the other side of the room. Her breath hitched in her throat when she saw him, a figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim light. The man's face was obscured by shadows, but there was something in his stance that made Lena's blood run cold. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in the tattered remnants of a mining suit, much like hers. But this wasn't just any Anne. There was something off about him, something deeply unsettling. "You shouldn't be here." His voice was low, thick with something dangerous. Lena's heart skipped a beat as she tried to speak, but her voice was trapped in her throat. The words she tried to speak wouldn't come. He stepped into the room, his presence consuming the space. His eyes, dark and hollow, were locked on hers, and it felt like he could see straight into her soul. There was a quiet power in him, a knowing that chilled her to the bone. "It's too late for you," he whispered, stepping closer, his shadow stretching over her. "The vein has already claimed you." Lena's breath caught in her chest as she backed away, her eyes wide with horror. The man, no, whatever he was closing in on her, and every instinct she had screamed for her to run, to escape. But there was nowhere to go. The tremors had stopped, but the air was now so thick with tension it felt suffocating. She could feel the pull of the vein again, stronger than ever. It wasn't just in the asteroid anymore. It was inside her, part of her, and the man, the thing standing before her, was a constant reminder that she could never escape it. Chapter 6. Beneath the surface, Lena's breath quickened, her pulse racing as the figure before her stepped further into the dimly lit chamber. The metallic scent in the air grew heavier, suffocating, like the very presence of the vein was closing in around her, tightening its grip. Her eyes darted to the crystalline object, but her focus was shattered by the shadowy figure whose presence now dominated the space. "You shouldn't be here." The words hung in the air, as thick and oppressive as the dust that swirled around them. He wasn't threatening her directly, not yet, but there was something about his tone, something in the way he moved that made it clear he knew more about the situation than he was letting on. Lena's fingers trembled as they curled into fists, her skin still buzzing with the after effects of the vein's touch. It hadn't fully faded. She could feel it deep inside her, pulsing, yearning, calling her back to the heart of the mine, to the vein. But the man, he was standing between her and the only thing she had thought would offer any kind of escape. She swallowed hard, gathering every ounce of willpower to steady herself. "Who are you?" Her voice came out hoarse, a faint echo of the strength she was trying to summon. She couldn't help but notice how the words seemed to tremble on the edge of her lips, as though even her body was fighting to stay in control. His lips curled into a bitter smile, though there was no humor in it. "I used to be like you," he muttered, eyes narrowing. "I thought I could control it, but now I'm part of it." His words lingered in the air, thick with meaning. Lena's heart skipped a beat. Part of it? What was he talking about? Was he referring to the vein? Had the darkness already consumed him? And if so, could she still escape its grasp? "I don't understand," Lena whispered, barely aware of her own words as she took another cautious step back. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to leave this place behind and never return. But the pull of the vein, The call was overwhelming. She wanted to turn and dive into the depth of it, to reach for it with both hands and let it consume her. But something in the man's eyes made her hesitate. Something about him felt wrong, like a part of his humanity had been torn away, replaced by something darker. The man took a step closer. The floor groaned beneath his weight, the walls of the chamber trembling slightly, as though the entire structure of the mine was reacting to his presence. You can't escape it. No one can. The vein is not just a substance, it's a doorway. And once you've crossed through it, his voice trailed off, the unspoken meaning sinking into Lena's bones. She could feel the presence of the vein like an energy field around her, like it was trying to breach her mind again, trying to overwhelm her. But it was different now. It wasn't just the whispers. It was something else. Something deeper. "You're already changed, Lena," he continued, his voice lower, almost sorrowful. "You're not the same as when you walked in here. You're part of it now, and the more you resist, the harder it will be to keep your mind intact. The longer you stay, the more it will take from you." Lena shook her head, a cold shiver running down her spine. No, she couldn't let it happen. She couldn't give in. "You're wrong," she spat, her voice filled with defiance. "I can stop it, I can still leave." He gave her a pitying look. "You don't get it. You are the vein now. You're already inside it, and it will never let you go. Never." His words were like a blow to her chest. She felt her breath catch, her throat tightening as the weight of what he said pressed down on her. Could he be right? Was she too far gone to ever truly escape the pull of the vein? The thought gnawed at her insides like a gnawing hunger. But then a flash of determination sparked within her. No. Lena's fists clenched tighter, and she took a step forward, ignoring the uncertainty in her gut. She couldn't let this man, this stranger, define her fate. She had come here with a mission, a reason. She couldn't let fear dictate her actions now. "I'll find a way," she said, her voice quieter but stronger. The man's eyes narrowed in response, studying her as though trying to figure out if she truly believed what she was saying. "You think you have a choice?" Lena didn't reply. She couldn't. His words rang too true, too painfully real. But she had to try. She had to believe that. There was something in her, some strength she hadn't tapped into yet, that could save her from this madness. But then, without warning, the man moved with a speed that startled her. One moment he was standing several feet away, and the next he was in front of her, his hand gripping her arm tightly. "You don't understand," he hissed, his breath hot against her ear. "You can't fight it. The vein owns you now. You think you can walk away." She gasped in shock, trying to wrench her arm from his grip, but his fingers were like iron, digging into her skin. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the briefest moment, Lena felt a surge of fear. The man's pupils were dilated, black and hollow, as though he were no longer entirely human. "I don't want to be like you," Lena forced out, her voice quivering but resolute. The man's lips parted slightly, as if he were about to say something more. But instead the ground beneath them shifted, a tremor running through the entire chamber, and the vein's pulsating hum grew louder, closer. Lena could feel it now, almost physically, as if the very air was thick with it. "It's coming," he muttered, his voice distant. "You'll have to make a choice soon. Either join it fully or be consumed by it. There's no in-between. You'll see." Before Lena could respond, the man released her, his eyes dark and filled with something that almost seemed like resignation. He stepped back, fading into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Lena stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what he meant, what was going to happen, but she didn't have time to contemplate. "Do you?" The vein was calling to her again, louder this time, its presence almost suffocating. Her body trembled as she turned toward the glowing crystal object, now seeming even more alive than before. Its pulse matched the beat of her heart. She felt her body move toward it again, each step feeling like it wasn't entirely hers to control. The whispers rose again, growing louder and more insistent. "You've come this far, Lena. You're ready. Accept it. Embrace us." Her breath quickened. The darkness inside her screamed for her to surrender, to give in to the overwhelming energy that throbbed at the core of the mine. But then, suddenly, a feeling, cold, clear, and sharp, cut through the haze. The voice of reason, her own voice. No, she stopped in her tracks, her fingers twitching at her sides as she fought against the pull. "You will not take me," she whispered fiercely. "I am not yours." The tension in the air seemed to shudder, as if the vein itself had heard her defiance. But even as she stood there, trembling in the darkness, Lena knew one thing for sure. The vein was not done with her yet. Chapter 7. The Vein's Grasp. The silence that followed the man's departure was suffocating. Lena stood frozen, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Her eyes were fixed on the crystalline object, which pulsed like the beat of a heart, casting soft, flickering light against the walls of the chamber. She felt the pull again, stronger this time, an invisible tether connecting her to it, to the very core of the vein. The whispers had died down, but they weren't gone. They had retreated into the deep recesses of her mind, lingering like a shadow, waiting for her to slip, waiting for her to lower her guard. She could feel their presence in her thoughts, their voices just beneath the surface of her consciousness, as if they were watching, waiting for the moment she would cave. "You're not in control." The voice was softer now, a whisper, but it felt like it was pressing against her ears, curling around her like smoke. Lena could feel the weight of it dragging her down. Her heart pounded in her chest, her fingers trembling as she reached out toward the crystalline structure. The light from it beckoned, warm and soft like an embrace. The urge to touch it was overwhelming, a hunger in her gut that only grew the closer she got. Her body moved against her will, her feet stepping forward despite every instinct screaming at her to stop, to run. She could feel the vein now, not just in the room, but inside her, buried deep within her like a pulse inside her blood, intertwining with her own heartbeat. "We are one," the voice whispered. Her fingers brushed against the surface of the crystal, and a sudden rush of energy coursed through her, sharp and electric. The force of it made her gasp, her body jerking back. She stumbled, catching herself against the cold, jagged wall. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her pulse hammering. In her ears, she could feel the vein's pull intensifying, its presence so strong now that it felt like it was reaching out to consume everything. The room was spinning, and for a moment, Lena thought she might lose consciousness. The whispers were louder, now more insistent. She heard them echoing not just in her mind, but all around her, as though the very walls of the chamber were alive with them. "You're ours." Lena's eyes darted around, her hands gripping her head as if trying to hold on to her thoughts, to keep herself from being swallowed whole. But the pull, it wouldn't let go. The whispers shifted. "We are always here. You are the vein." The voice seemed to say in unison. The words reverberated, each one digging deeper into her psyche. The man's words echoed through her mind. "You're already part of it." She wanted to reject it, to deny it, but the truth was undeniable. Every breath she took felt like a surrender, every beat of her heart, a step closer to something irreversible. But then, just as she thought she might collapse under the weight, something else surged inside her, a flicker of resilience. It was small, but it was there. A voice, her own voice, standing against the tide of darkness. No. With a sudden rush of will, Lena pushed herself off the wall, her legs shaking beneath her. She backed away from the crystal, away from the force that tried to consume her. She wasn't sure how she was doing it, how she was holding herself together. But she knew one thing. She wasn't ready to give up yet. She forced herself to breathe deeply, her hands gripping her sides as if she could physically hold herself in place. The vein's call didn't stop. It continued stronger than ever, but she refused to let it take over. "Not now. Not yet. You cannot fight what you are." The voice was louder now, a cacophony that seemed to come from every direction, pressing on her, twisting around her thoughts. But Lena wasn't listening to it anymore. She could still feel its weight in her chest, but she wasn't going to let it define her. She turned her back on the crystal, feeling its pull at the base of her spine, but she forced herself to walk away from it step by heavy step. She had to get out. She had to leave before she lost herself entirely. The chamber seemed to stretch before her, endless, disorienting. She felt as though the walls were moving, shifting beneath her feet, as if the very space she was in was alive, bending to the will of the vein. It was becoming harder to keep track of where she was, her surroundings blurring with each step. She had to get out. But the deeper she walked, the more lost she felt. The walls closed in on her, and the shadows seemed to grow longer, more oppressive. She reached out to steady herself on the wall, but her fingers slid against something wet and warm. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Blood. Lena looked down, her eyes wide with terror. The walls were streaked with it, dark red patches smeared across the jagged surface. Her stomach churned, bile rising in her throat. Suddenly, a sound broke through the silence. The unmistakable click of something shifting in the dark. Lena's heart leapt into her throat as she spun around. Her eyes darted from side to side, searching for the source of the sound. And then, she saw it. A figure half hidden in the shadows. It moved with unnatural speed, its shape blurry and indistinct, like it was fading in and out of existence. The figure's face was hidden in darkness, but she could feel its eyes on her. Cold, predatory. You can't run from it. The voice was distorted, fragmented, as though it was not entirely human. Lena's breath came in short, frantic gasps. The creature, if that's what it was closing in on her, its body twisting unnaturally as if it were a part of the shadows themselves. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away, her eyes darting around for an escape. The walls seemed to narrow, squeezing her in, trapping her. She couldn't outrun this thing, not in the state she was in, not with the vein inside her consuming her. But she couldn't just stand there. She had to fight, survive. The creature lunged at her, its claws extended like talons, but Lena was faster. She twisted to the side, narrowly avoiding its grasp. She scrambled to her feet, the adrenaline kicking in, her body moving on pure instinct. You can't fight it, Lena. You're already ours. The voice surrounded her, closing in, but she refused to let it take her. She pushed herself to her feet, her body screaming in protest, and sprinted forward, the walls of the chamber closing in around her like a vice. Her mind was a blur, but one thought cut through the chaos. She had to escape. She had to find a way out. The creature's claws scraped across the floor, but Lena was already running, her legs pumping harder, her breath raw and labored in her chest. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know how far she had to run, but she couldn't stop. Not now. The further she ran, the more the darkness seemed to press in on her, the more the vein seemed to claw its way into her soul. The creature's voice echoed in her mind as the shadows seemed to swallow her whole. There is no escape. We will have you. Lena's heart skipped a beat, but she gritted her teeth, forcing herself to run faster. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she couldn't stop. She wouldn't. Chapter 8. The Heart of Darkness. The cold air in the mine seemed to press down on Lena, suffocating her with every labored breath. She had been running for what felt like hours, but she could no longer tell how much time had passed. The shadows around her seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in like the maw of some unseen beast. She had no idea where she was anymore. The familiar layout of the mine had dissolved into a nightmarish labyrinth, each turn leading her deeper into the bowels of the vein's influence. Her legs ached, her muscles burning, but she pushed on, each step driven by the primal instinct to survive. The whispers in her mind were louder now, the voices swirling around her like a storm. They were no longer distant, no longer just a subtle hum in the background. Now they were inside her head, filling her thoughts, pounding against her skull, urging her to give in. You're not meant to fight it, you belong here, you're one of us. The words echoed in her ears like a chant, unrelenting. She tried to block them out, to focus on her escape, But the darkness seemed to be creeping closer, the walls narrowing with each step. The further she ran, the more disoriented she became, as though the very mine itself was shifting beneath, her feet changing its shape, trapping her in a never-ending cycle. She rounded a corner and almost collided with a wall of black stone, smooth and slick, like the surface of the vein itself. The air around her thickened, pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. She staggered backward, her hand reaching out to steady herself on the wall, but the surface pulsed under her touch, warm and alive. Her heart skipped a beat as she felt the vein's power surge through her fingertips. The pulsating hum in the air seemed to answer her touch, vibrating in tune with the racing beat of her heart. She recoiled instinctively, shaking her head as if she could shake the sensation off. No, she wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. Lena, the voice was closer now, sharper, filled with malice. It wasn't just the whispers. This time it was a deep guttural sound, the kind that vibrated through her bones. She spun around, fear clutching her throat. There was no one there, but she could feel it, the presence closing in on her. She wasn't alone. "We've been waiting for you." The words sliced through the air, sharp and cold. They felt like fingers dragging across her skin, tracing the line between fear and something far darker, something far more dangerous. Her body was trembling now, not just from exhaustion, but from a deeper, more primal fear. She couldn't outrun. The vein was everywhere. Inside the walls, inside the air, inside her. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing in rhythm with her own heartbeat, and the more she resisted, the louder the voices became. It was all around her, all of it. She didn't know how much longer she could keep running. She was starting to feel weak, her thoughts fragmented and scattered. Each step felt heavier, as if the mine itself were sinking into her bones, pulling her under. The further she went, the harder it became to distinguish reality from the distorted images in her mind. And then she heard it. A low, guttural growl reverberated through the walls, vibrating in her chest. Something was moving in the dark. Lena froze. Her heart stopped in her chest. The growl grew louder, closer. It was coming for her. Her breath caught in her throat as she whipped around, her eyes scanning the dark corridors for any sign of movement. But it was too late. Before she could react, the creature emerged from the shadows, its form impossibly twisted, a grotesque mockery of a human shape. Its body was fluid, shifting as if made of darkness itself, and its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with an unnatural light, alien and ancient. The growl came from deep within its chest, rumbling like a thunderstorm about to break. Lena took a step back, fear coursing through her veins. Her legs refused to move. The creature reached out, its elongated fingers stretching toward her, claws scraping against the stone floor with a sickening screech. She stumbled backward, her heart pounding. But the mine was closing in around her and there was nowhere left to run. The creature lunged at her with terrifying speed. Lena's instincts kicked in, and she barely managed to duck, the creature's claws grazing the air where her head had been just a second before. She scrambled away, her breath ragged, her mind racing. She had to do something. She couldn't just stand there and die. Her hand brushed against something cold and sharp. She didn't look. She grabbed it instinctively, feeling the weight of it in her palm. Something metallic, something heavy. A piece of broken mining equipment. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. With all her strength, she swung it at the creature, aiming for its face. The metal connected with its body, but it didn't make the satisfying clang she expected. Instead, the creature hissed, its skin rippling like liquid, absorbing the blow. "You can't stop us, Lena." The voice came from inside her head, so loud it felt like it was splitting her skull. She dropped the mining tool, her hands shaking. The creature was closing in again, faster this time. Its jaws opened wide, filled with rows of jagged teeth that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. But then, just as it was about to strike, Lena heard something else. A familiar sound, one that had been haunting her for what felt like days. The low hum of the vein. She froze, her gaze snapping toward the glowing crystal object she had seen earlier, still pulsing softly in the distance. The creature was too close now. She couldn't outrun it. But the crystal, it might be her only hope. The hum grew louder, and for the first time Lena felt a strange connection to it, a sense of understanding. She didn't know why, but she felt drawn to it. Maybe it was the power that was calling to her, or maybe it was the vein itself, speaking to her in ways she didn't understand. But one thing was certain, it was the only way out. With a surge of strength, Lena broke from her frozen stance and sprinted toward the crystal. The creature howled in fury behind her, but Lena didn't stop. Her vision blurred, her body fueled by the desperate need to escape. Lena. "You can't outrun us," the words echoed in her mind, but she didn't care. She reached the crystal, her fingers trembling as she touched it, and as soon as she made contact, a rush of energy surged through her. The ground beneath her feet trembled violently as the vein responded to her touch, its power flooding her senses. It wasn't just a physical sensation, it was in her mind, her soul, her very being. For a moment she felt as though she were one with it. The power, the dark energy was inside her. She closed her eyes, her breath ragged as the world around her warped and twisted. The vein was taking hold of her, and it was consuming her. But even as the darkness pressed in, she found something. A flicker of strength, a spark of defiance. She wasn't going to give up, she couldn't. The world around her shifted again, and suddenly, she was standing in an empty room, the darkness of the mine receding into nothingness. The creature was gone. The hum of the vein had faded, but in the silence that followed, Lena knew she wasn't free. She had touched the heart of the vein, and now it was in her as much a part of her as her own breath. "There's no going back," the voice echoed, a soft whisper in the air. Lena closed her eyes. She had entered this place to find answers, but now she realized something terrifying. The answers she sought might be more than she was prepared to face. Chapter 9. The price of the vein. Lena stood still, her body trembling, her eyes wide with the overwhelming force of what had just happened. Her mind raced, spinning, as if the world around her had been torn apart and reassembled in 1,000 different ways, none of them making sense. The air was heavy, charged with a strange energy that hummed in her bones, vibrating in the deepest corners of her mind. The crystal, the heart of the vein, was still in front of her, glowing softly. In the dim, oppressive light of the chamber, she hadn't let go of it, hadn't moved from its side since the moment it had first surged into her, wrapping its dark energy around her like a chain. Her fingers were numb, but she couldn't pull away. It was as if the crystal had claimed her, binding her to it, drawing from her energy, feeding off her very soul. The whispers were louder now. They weren't just murmurs in the back of her mind anymore. They were commanding, demanding her attention, twisting her thoughts in ways she didn't understand. Her hands gripped the crystal, but her mind felt as if it were slipping away, as if something inside her were being devoured. "You are one with us now." The voice was deeper, more resonant, as though it came from everywhere at once. "Feel the power, it is yours, Lena." Her breath came in shallow, panicked gasps. This wasn't just a mine. It wasn't just some strange material, some dark substance beneath the surface of an asteroid. This was something much older, much more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. The vein was a doorway, a gateway, and now she had crossed it. There was no turning back. The walls of the chamber seemed to close in on her, the shadows stretching, moving as if alive, whispering her name in unison. It felt like the darkness was swallowing her whole, inch by inch, piece by piece. She could feel it, its cold fingers creeping into her, into every crack of her being, slowly suffocating her from within. "You cannot fight what you are becoming," she gasped, jerking away from the crystal. But the pull was still there, deep inside her, like a part of her soul had been carved out and replaced with something dark. She tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the echoing void around her, and her voice died in her throat. For a moment, she was frozen, her body locked in place, her mind spiraling. Her head throbbed as the voices continued, thundering. Through her mind, growing louder with each passing second. Embrace it, Lena. Let it flow through you. You are ours. You always have been. It was a lie. It had to be. She was Lena, the woman who had come to this mine to understand the secrets, buried beneath the surface. She wasn't part of this thing, whatever it was. She wasn't a vessel for its darkness. She couldn't be. But as the words pressed into her mind, it was harder to fight back. There was something about them, something that felt like truth, something that made her question her very existence. She had come here to explore, to understand. But now, as the walls closed in, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. No, she whispered, but the word felt hollow, meaningless in the face of the overwhelming force that surrounded her. The air around her shifted, and she staggered, almost losing her balance. The ground trembled beneath her feet as the chamber seemed to rearrange itself, the walls twisting and bending, the lights flickering erratically. It was like the mine was alive, reacting to her. She had been drawn in, claimed by the vein, and now it was doing something to her, something she couldn't comprehend. You are part of us now. Let the darkness take you. The voice was insistent, demanding, and she couldn't ignore it. The crystal pulsed again, its glow intensifying, and with it, Lena felt the tendrils of the vein tighten around her heart, around her mind. The darkness wasn't just consuming the mine, it was consuming her. No, she said again, stronger this time, though her voice trembled. She tried to pull away, tried to move, but it was like she was being pulled back toward the crystal, as if the very air around her was filled with the weight of its presence. Fight it, she whispered to herself, but the words felt like a weak plea against the growing storm inside her. Her fingers flexed, but she couldn't free herself from its grip. The crystal had become a part of her, its power winding through her veins like a snake, coiling tighter, squeezing the life out of her. In that moment, she understood. This wasn't just a physical struggle. It was a battle for her mind, for her very soul. The vein was trying to consume her, to overwrite her with its darkness, to make her one with the abyss that had existed far longer than humanity could ever have known. And it was winning. Lena's mind began to blur. The edges of reality felt thin, fragile, like they could shatter at any moment. It was happening. She was changing, becoming something else, something that wasn't her. The voices were everywhere, echoing inside. Her head, their words seeping into her thoughts like poison. You can't fight it, Lena. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was many, dozens, hundreds, all speaking in unison, all telling her the same thing. She was theirs. She always had been. It's not too late. The voice was different now. It was a woman's voice, soft and seductive, like a promise. Let go. Let us in. We'll give you everything you've ever wanted. Lena's heart raced. The urge to give in was overwhelming, like a siren's call, but she fought it. She had to. She wasn't sure what would happen if she let go, but she knew she couldn't risk losing herself. Not like this. With a final, desperate cry, Lena pulled herself away from the crystal, stumbling backward, her legs shaking beneath her. The chamber around her seemed to shift in response as if it were alive, its walls closing in, its shadows growing longer, darker. No, I'm not yours, Lena shouted, her voice shaking with the weight of her fear and defiance. She could hear the creatures in the dark, could feel them moving closer, the pressure in the air rising, but she refused to give in. She refused to be swallowed whole, and yet there was something inside her now, something dark, something that had been awakened by the vein's touch, something that had changed her. She could feel it deep inside, its influence creeping through every corner of her mind. You're too late. The words slipped from her lips before she could stop them. A whisper, but one filled with the certainty of someone who had already succumbed to the darkness. The voices in her mind grew louder again. They weren't just words now. They were urges, commands, and Lena could feel herself faltering. The pull was irresistible, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't give up now. Lena. The voice came from behind her, the familiar, guttural growl. She didn't have to turn around to know it was the creature, the one that had followed her through the mine. It was close, its presence dark and suffocating. Lena felt her body tense, her breath catching in her throat. There was no way out now. She had reached the heart of it, the heart of the vein, and now it was claiming her. The creature was coming. The darkness was coming. But Lena, for the first time in what felt like forever, didn't give in. "I am not yours," she said. And this time, it was a declaration. She may have been drawn in by the vein, but she still had her will. She wasn't going to let this thing consume her. She wasn't going to let it win. But the question remained. How much longer could she hold on? Chapter 10. The final descent. Lena's breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale a struggle as her mind wrestled with the overwhelming darkness that threatened to swallow her whole. She was standing at the very center of the mine now, surrounded by the pulsating glow of the vein. The walls were alive with movement, undulating as if the mine itself were breathing. It was a living, sentient thing, a creature of unimaginable age and power, and it had claimed her as its own. She could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on her, sinking deep into her soul. Her thoughts were fragmented, distorted, like 1,000 voices screaming inside her head. But she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She had to find a way to fight back, to escape before the vein consumed her completely. But she couldn't ignore the pull. It was like a magnetic force tugging at her very essence, urging her to surrender. The whispers were louder now, overwhelming her senses, drowning out everything else. "You are mine." The voice was no longer just a whisper. It was a roar that filled the air, vibrating through her bones. The mine was speaking to her, its words seeping into her veins, taking root in her very being. "You are part of the vein now. You cannot escape. There is nowhere to run." Her hands shook as she pressed them against her ears, trying to block out the voices. But it was impossible. They were everywhere, inside her, around her, suffocating her. The darkness was so thick now, it felt like it was wrapping around her, pulling her down, pulling her into the void. "Let go, you cannot fight it." The voice was seductive, coaxing her, promising her things she couldn't understand. "You will be one with us, Lena. You will be powerful, you will be free." The promise of freedom almost made her falter. Almost. But Lena knew better. She had seen the creature, the one that had hunted her through the mine. She had felt its cold, malevolent presence, and she knew that whatever the vein was offering, it wasn't freedom. It was entrapment. It was death. She could still feel the coldness of its touch on her skin, as if it had already marked her, branded her as its own. The creature's growl echoed in the distance, reverberating through the walls. The mine was closing in on her, tightening its grip, and she could feel herself slipping like she was drowning in darkness. But then, in the depths of her fear, something inside her stirred, a flicker of defiance, of something she hadn't realized she still had. Strength. She had come here for answers. She had uncovered the vein's power, its horrors, but she couldn't let it take her. Not like this. Not without a fight. With all the strength she could muster, Lena shoved the voices away, pushing them out of her mind. The pressure on her chest loosened, just enough to give her a moment of clarity. She could hear the echo of her heartbeat, loud and steady, reminding her that she was still alive. She had to keep fighting. She had to keep going. Lena's hands trembled as she reached for the crystal again, her fingers brushing against its surface. The vein's energy surged into her, but this time she didn't resist. Instead, she allowed herself to feel it fully. The raw, unbridled power of the mine, the energy that had been pulsing through her since the moment she had touched. It was now a part of her, but she wasn't going to give in. She focused. She centered herself. Lena reached deep within her, searching for the strength to push back against the vein. The whispers inside her were still there, louder than ever, but they no longer held the same power over her. She could feel their presence, but they couldn't control her anymore. She was not their puppet. "You are not me," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I am not yours." The crystal pulsed in response, its light flaring brighter, almost blinding. The energy surged through her body, more intense than ever. It felt like fire, like ice, a rush of pure force that threatened to break her apart. But Lena held on, focusing on that one thought, that single thread of defiance. "You are not me," she repeated, louder this time, as the power of the vein pushed against her will. And then, something cracked. It was like a sudden shift in the air, a break in the flow of energy. The pressure that had been crushing her chest eased just a little. The voices in her mind faltered, their harsh whispers fading into the distance. Lena's grip on the crystal tightened, and she forced herself to push back. "I am not yours," she said again, each word more powerful than the last. The mind trembled beneath her feet, the walls vibrating with the force of her defiance. The creature's growl intensified, but now it seemed to waver, unsure as if it were being pulled back, its strength diminishing. The darkness that had swallowed the mind began to recede, pulling away from her like a veil being lifted. Lena could feel it. The vein was losing its hold on her, but she wasn't done yet. The energy that had once been suffocating her now surged to the surface, like a torrent that could no longer be contained. The vein was powerful, but it was not invincible. Lena's eyes flashed open, and she saw it. The heart of the mine, the source of its power. The massive vein of dark crystal that stretched into the ground, its tendrils twisting and writhing like a living thing. It was the core, the source of everything, and it was her only chance. Summoning every ounce of strength she had left, Lena reached out, her fingers brushing the stone. The crystal responded, its energy pulsing, but this time, she wasn't just receiving it, she was channeling it. The ground shook violently beneath her feet as the power of the vein surged through her, but she didn't pull away. She focused, using every bit of energy she could summon to break the connection, to sever the ties that bound her to the darkness. For a moment, it felt as if the world around her was breaking apart. The mine's walls cracked, the glowing veins of dark energy flaring bright with fury. The creature's growl became a roar, as though the entire mine was alive, fighting to maintain its hold. But Lena was not afraid. With one final defiant scream, she pushed the vein away. The power of the crystal pulsed through her, a blinding light that filled the chamber. And then, with a deafening crash, the mine's hold on her shattered. Lena collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath as the darkness around her began to recede. The crushing weight that had pressed down on her chest lifted, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she could breathe. The whispers, the growls, the cold, oppressive force, they were all gone. The mine was silent. She had won. But as she lay there on the cold, jagged floor, her body exhausted, her mind reeling from the battle she had just fought, she knew something had changed. The vein was gone, yes, but she could still feel its presence lingering in the back of her mind, like a shadow she couldn't escape. It was no longer controlling her, but it had left its mark. She would never be the same again. Lena closed her eyes, letting the silence wash over her. She had survived. She had broken free, but the cost had been steep. The mine, the vein, had claimed its price, and it was one she would have to carry with her for the rest of her life. But for now she had won. She had escaped the darkness, and that, for the moment, was enough. Epilogue. The price of survival. Lena stood at the edge of the mine's entrance, gazing out over the barren landscape of the asteroid. The once thriving operation had been reduced to a shell of its former self, the echoes of the vein's influence. Still lingering in the air, though now it was quieter, more distant. The sky above her was an endless stretch of cold, empty void, a vast expanse that seemed to mirror the emptiness inside her. She had survived. She had defeated the vein, and the creature that had haunted her every step of the way was now nothing but a fading memory. But it didn't feel like a victory. Her hands, trembling slightly, gripped the railing in front of her. She could still feel the weight of the crystal's energy coursing through her veins, as if it were a part of her, a dark thread woven into her very being. The mind-splitting whispers, The promises of power, they had quieted, but they hadn't entirely disappeared. No, they were still there, deep within her, in the corners of her consciousness, waiting for a moment of weakness, a crack in her resolve. She wasn't sure what had really happened during the final battle with the vein. The crystal had responded to her, but it had been almost like she was no longer in control of her own body, as though something inside her had taken over, an instinct, a force older and darker than anything she had ever known. For a moment she had felt it, the power so vast, so primal. It had been tempting, so tempting to let it take her, to surrender to it completely. But she hadn't. She had fought back, even when everything inside her screamed to give in. And now here she was. She didn't know what to make of the aftermath. Her body was scarred, her mind frayed at the edges from the horrors she had experienced. And yet she couldn't escape the feeling that something had changed in her, something had shifted deep inside. She could feel it in her bones, a sense of power, of knowledge that she hadn't had before. But there was a price. There always was. Lena's eyes shifted to the horizon, where the distant glow of the asteroid's surface caught the dying light of the far-off star. She had spent so long in the heart of the mine, trapped within its walls, that the world outside felt foreign, as if she had forgotten how to truly see it, how to truly live. She had walked into the mine hoping to understand its secrets. But what she had found had been far beyond anything she had expected. And now, even though the vein was gone, its legacy remained with her. The whispers still lingered, soft and insistent, like a song she couldn't unhear. The shadows in her mind shifted, always present, as if they were waiting for the moment when her guard would falter, waiting for her to give in. But Lena was not a weak woman. She had survived the vein's grip and she had come out the other side. She wasn't the same person who had first stepped into that mine. She couldn't be. And yet, part of her wondered if she could ever truly escape it. "Are you all right?" The voice broke through her reverie and Lena turned slowly, her eyes falling on the face of her old colleague, Jace. His expression was one of concern, but there was something else in his gaze, something that made Lena uneasy. He knew. He had seen the way the vein had changed her. They all had. And yet none of them understood. "I'm fine," she said quietly, her voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. Was she fine? How could she be after everything that had happened? Jace seemed unconvinced, but he didn't press her further. He stepped closer, looking out at the expanse of the asteroid. "Looks like the operation's over," he said, his tone flat. "No more mining, no more answers. It's all been shut down. We're leaving." Lena nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. It was strange to feel like she was finally free, but also to know that she could never truly leave the mine behind. The memories, the darkness, the vein. It had all become a part of her, whether she wanted it or not. As Jace turned to walk back to the ship, Lena hesitated. Her heart was heavy, the weight of everything she had seen and experienced pressing down on her chest. The fight with the vein had been brutal, but it hadn't been the hardest part. The hardest part was the after, the part where she had to live with what she had become. She could hear it again, the whisper, like a soft caress against her mind. She clenched her fists, trying to push it away. "You are mine, Lena. You always were." It wasn't the vein anymore. It was something else, something that had seeped into her soul. The power had been hers, and now it lingered, waiting, always present, always beckoning. Lena exhaled sharply, a bitter smile crossing her lips. She had survived. She had won. But victory didn't feel like it should. The price she had paid was steep, and the road ahead was uncertain. Could she live with it? Could she live with the darkness that was now a part of her? She didn't know, but one thing was certain. She couldn't ignore the power forever. The vein had shaped her, marked her, and its influence would remain with her for as long as she lived. There was no going back, and as Lena took one final, lingering glance at the horizon, she realized the truth. She had escaped the mine, but the vein had never left her. The end. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know in the comments what ideas you would like the next story to be about. Please leave a thumbs up, share, subscribe, comment.